Is the Torah real or is it parabolic? What should I make of the Torah? This series is going to explore not only how the Torah is real, but the events actually took place in a real understanding, and not only that, how the events that took place are corroborated by historical evidence, scientific evidence, archaeological evidence, and will give you a sense of how these events took place and what we're supposed to understand from them. And now we are in the next episode of proving that the Torah is in fact real. A major question that people ask is, where did all the people come from? Especially, who did Cain marry? Clearly there had to be a male and female. But then you have someone who has very good insight, and sometimes the question is better than the answer. And here's the question.
The Bible tells us that the first humans lived about 6,000 years ago, but we found human remains from far before then. So how do we reconcile the fact that science seems to disagree with the Bible?
This presupposes intelligence. There's two things that the Torah says. It says, number one is that man and woman were created, generally speaking. People were created. They were created on the sixth day, so to speak. We already talked about in the previous episode how it wasn't exactly a day. And they were created and they were given to flourish on the earth. Then there was also man that started the lineage from Adam to Noah, and Noah's three sons, and from Shem to Abraham. What's important to know about the Torah is that when it writes history, it writes it based on its thesis. It's a history of the Israelites. God starts off with how the world was created. The purpose of that being showing that the world was created for a purpose. If it says that God created the world, therefore he owns everything. And therefore any land he gives to the Israelites, he has a right to give. We're going to see in the later episodes how Abraham earned the right to the land. And it said, Elohim said to the ground, let us make man. It will be a divine being, and he will be a physical being. That God made man in his image with a godly image. Male and female, he made them. And like all other animals, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, multiply, fill the earth and master over it, etc., etc. And that is creation. And then it says, the heaven and the earth and all their legions, everything else that came out of heaven and earth, everything else that came out of heaven, space, and earth, matter, were created. Now, I know the Midrashic interpretation is very against this interpretation. But again, the Midrash is parable, and the Midrash is there to teach us a lesson. But physically speaking, we already proved how the days weren't days. Therefore, they're not days. And therefore, the way we're reading it now is, whatever lessons you want to take from the Midrash, you take from the Midrash. But the way the Torah writes the history of mankind, this is an alternative explanation. After it says that God rested, then it says, Eila Toldos Hashemayim. Toldos means generations. Whenever the Torah says Toldos, generations, it means what was the main lineage, what was the great heritage that came out of something. Now it uses both terms for God. It uses the tetragrammaton, meaning his relationship between man and himself, because now man has been created. And it uses the Elohim, which is him and creation. The main lineage and heritage that came out of space and matter that he created was the fact that he created Earth, our planet. So the question is there other life in other planets? It's a huge waste of space if there's not. However, this verse seems to indicate there may not be life in other planets, because the point of the entire creation was for mankind on this planet. The next verse will also prove that evolution happens, but evolution happens with the hand of God. And all of the shrubs of the field and the grasses were not yet on the earth, but Ba'aretz, in the land. In other words, he called the dry land on the land, and all the foliage of the fields had not yet sprouted. So we had a dry planet. Why? Because there was no rain yet that fell on, and there was no man to work it. Now, first of all, this verse completely contradicts the earlier verse. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees of every kind, etc., etc. And it was so. What's the answer to the contradiction? That was on day 3. When did we get our solar system? On day 4. Therefore, if in the order of creation, section 3, God said that there should be the ability for vegetation to sprout, that happened. However, he held it back on this planet. When this planet was made, until man was made on the 6th day, the 6th section, there was a holding back of it. Clearly, the animals had to feed on something because the animals are given all the foliage to eat. So clearly, there was vegetation. So we have the ability for the ground to sprout, but it did not yet sprout until man is on the earth. Obviously, man was created right after animals, and in the time that all the animals were created, clearly there was vegetation for them to eat. So this verse means in a certain portion of the world, God prevented vegetation to sprout because he wanted to teach man a lesson, and who that man was, that would be Adam. The next verse says, but a flow would well up from the ground and water the surface of the earth. So clearly there was water in the earth, and clearly there was vegetation elsewhere all over the planet, except for this one area. Now, the names of the lands that the rivers crossed obviously were named later, and this is a very important thing in the Torah because oftentimes the Torah uses names that were used later. The Torah was written and gave the names of the places based on when it was written, when the Israelites were about to go into the land of Israel. So therefore, clearly, a place called Cush was not yet invented right now. And Cush was established by one of the descendants of Adam. So therefore, clearly, it couldn't have been then. But the reason why I called it Cush, because for simplification, to say, by the way, the river runs through the place that would be called Cush. So then God fashions a female out of Adam. Now, we could say this explains how God made man and female in the previous verse. So the way the verses flow is that God created all creation and either rested and then said, okay, I'm going to make this special lineage of man. So he made another man, and this one he pulled out of the dirt and he blew the soul into him. Mankind was created generally, and they were given dominion over the earth. And then at the same time, even before God stopped creation, God made this special man, Adam, and put him into the Garden of Eden. So originally, it was Elohim that created mankind because mankind was created in creation. Adam was created from both Hashem Elohim, the one who is administrating over mankind and the one that's administrating over creation. So therefore, that also indicates that Adam was made special, because it would have said Hashem Elohim made mankind, male and female, but instead it said only Elohim is the one that did it. Only in that capacity was general mankind created. Adam and Eve, special, were made by Hashem also because now Hashem was really dealing with mankind. Therefore, this special lineage of man from Adam to Noah, Noah to Abraham, was created initially with no connection whatsoever to the Neanderthal or the early proto mankind that was on Earth. Clearly, though, there was a mixture of the blood because they needed spouses. And while the Torah doesn't always record all the women that were made, it doesn't record all the daughters unless it's necessary. It seems very likely that instead of intermarrying themselves, they probably intermarried with the mankind species that are already on Earth. When Adam and Eve are ejected from the Garden of Eden, God again says that with the sweat of your brow is how you're going to eat bread. And until you return to the ground, that's how you're going to make your livelihood. So he, in a way, cursed the ground at the time, or at least cursed mankind that he will have to till the ground. So when the previous verse that we talked about said that God withheld the water, the rains until man would work it, it means a certain area, plot of land, either in the Garden of Eden or right outside the Garden of Eden, where Adam was ejected to, that he had to cultivate from scratch. This helps us because after Cain kills his brother Abel, Cain kills Hevel. Cain is very worried that he's going to be retaliated against. But who is going to retaliate against Cain if there's no recording that Hevel had any children? Clearly, it is the other people of the world. He's afraid that now he's going to be marked as a dead man for killing someone, so others in the world will go ahead and kill him. So God put a special mark on Cain to make sure that he's not going to be killed. By whom? By all the people that were already on the earth. It says before the flood, there was these beings called Nephilim, and the Nephilim were going ahead and cohabiting with the human women. In other words, you now had those who came from this austere lineage, which was Adam and Eve's lineage, and they were procreating with the regular mankind that was there. A final point is the Torah knew before science that there were no intelligent writings before Adam. In other words, nothing has been found earlier than 6,000 years ago. There's been proto-cuneiform found right about 6,000 years ago. So while there were mankind that were developed over the millions of years that the planet was being developed through evolution, when Adam was made, that's when real intelligence came into this planet. And that's when we start finding that what's intelligence, language, and writing. Tune in next time as we explain the whole episode of the Garden of Eden.